I remember the first time I saw her, standing in my office doorway with her son pressed against her hip, one hand gripping a manila folder so tightly I thought it might tear in two. She looked fragile. Not just in the physical sense, though she was petite and tired-looking, like she hadn't slept in weeks. No, I mean emotionally fragile. Like the world had thrown one too many punches, and she had stopped trying to dodge them. I didn't know then what she would mean to me. Or what I would be willing to do just to have a piece of the life she came from. Her name was Emily Rowe, and she was the widow of Jonathan Rowe, a real estate mogul who died in a sudden car accident just 4 months ago. She didn't look like someone who used to dine with senators or vacation on private islands. She looked like someone trying to figure out how to breathe again. "Mr. Sloane," she asked, her voice soft but uncertain. I stood, offered a firm hand. "Please, call me Andrew." She smiled a little and stepped in, guiding her boy, Leo, she told me, into the seat beside her. The kid was maybe 4, big blue eyes like they didn't belong on this planet. Innocent. Way too innocent for the world he'd just been handed. I found these," she said, sliding the folder across my desk. Jonathan had them in a safe. The key was taped under the piano, of all places. She tried to laugh. It didn't quite land. I opened the folder, curious. A collection of estate documents, asset ledgers, and a last will and testament, updated just 6 months before his death. I flipped through pages absent-mindedly at first, but then a particular paragraph stopped me cold. My eyes ran over it twice, then a third time. It stated that the entirety of Jonathan Rowe's estate, real estate holdings, cash assets, stock in his various companies, commercial properties, was to be left to his only biological child, Leo Rowe. Not his wife. Not his family. Just the child. And until Leo reached the age of 18, the estate would be managed by a legal guardian of the child's choosing, or the court's choosing if the mother remained unmarried. I read it again. Slower. The implications hit like a shot of cold water. "You're not listed as the executor," I said carefully, trying to keep my tone neutral. Emily blinked. "No. Jonathan said it would all go to Leo." I didn't question it at the time. He always said he wanted Leo to grow up protected. "But you're not the guardian, legally speaking." Her shoulders sagged. "No. Not yet. The court is processing it. I've been in hearings for months. They keep delaying. There are family members contesting." Of course there were. A child can't legally manage hundreds of millions. Someone would be appointed to oversee it, someone Jonathan didn't trust, someone who might not have Leo's or Emily's best interest at heart. I could see the fear in her eyes. The desperation. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Emily, do you know what this clause really means?" She looked confused. "That Leo gets everything." "Yes, but more than that. It means that whoever is legally responsible for Leo controls everything. Until he's of age." Her face went pale. "They could sell the businesses, liquidate the properties, even move him to another state under the pretense of better schooling. This clause doesn't just protect Leo. It traps him." For a moment, the room was quiet. Just the ticking of the old wall clock and the sound of Leo chewing on a piece of gum he probably wasn't supposed to have. She looked at me like I'd just shown her the edge of a cliff. "I didn't know that," she whispered. I nodded slowly. "Not many do. That's why I'm glad you came to me." That's when it began, the idea. The seed of something dark and opportunistic sprouting in the corner of my mind. I could help her. I could be the one who saved her from this mess. I was smart, well-connected, and more than capable of navigating the legal tangle ahead. And if I played my cards right, if I became part of Leo's life, then all of that inheritance wouldn't just be theoretical. It would be real. Accessible. Mine. I shouldn't be telling you this. I know how it sounds. But people like me don't grow up dreaming of saving the world. We dream of winning. Of having more. Of being untouchable. Emily was grieving. Vulnerable. Beautiful in a way that made your chest ache. She wasn't some gold digger looking for a new handout, she was a woman barely holding herself together. And I could be the one to put her back together. That night, I stayed in the office long after she left. I stared at the will. At the numbers. At the structure of Jonathan's empire. It was genius, really. Locked away so tightly that only one key could open it, the boy. The next few weeks, I did everything I could to help her. Pro bono, of course. I told her I couldn't stand to see Jonathan's legacy fall into the wrong hands. She was grateful. She called me her lifeline. I told her I was just doing my job, but inside, I smiled. I started bringing Leo small toys when they came in for updates. I got him to laugh. Emily noticed. Her eyes softened when she looked at me. We started talking outside the office, coffee breaks, phone calls about court updates that turned into hour-long conversations about life, music, parenting. One night she cried on the phone. She said she didn't know how to live without Jonathan, how to be a single mom, how to protect a future she didn't understand. And I told her, gently, carefully, that she wasn't alone. "You've got me," I said. She went quiet. The next morning, she brought me a muffin. It wasn't a big gesture. But it meant something. I knew I was getting close. Close enough that I could almost taste it. The house in the Hamptons. The trust funds. The control of Jonathan's corporations. The influence. It was all there, just waiting for someone to step in and take the reins. All I had to do was make her fall in love with me. And make her believe I loved her back. The truth? I wasn't sure where the act began and where I ended anymore. There's something intoxicating about being needed. It didn't start as a game, not really. At first, I was just trying to help. Maybe a part of me even believed I was doing the right thing. But somewhere between the fourth time I held the door open for Emily and the first time she texted me after midnight just to say thank you, I started seeing things differently. She was alone in a world she didn't understand, and I understood it better than most. Lawyers, judges, banks, trustees, all circling like vultures, waiting for a piece of the fortune her husband left behind. They didn't care about her, or the boy. But I did. Or at least that's what I told myself. That's what I let her believe. One Friday evening, she called me in a panic. "Andrew, I just got a letter. Jonathan's cousin is petitioning for custody. He's trying to claim I'm unfit because I didn't sign the prenuptial documents 5 years ago. What does that even mean?" I told her to breathe, told her I'd be there in 20 minutes. When I got to her townhouse, the place was a mess. Not dirty, just scattered. Like her thoughts. Toys on the floor, dishes in the sink, a half-drunk glass of red wine on the table. Leo was already asleep upstairs. She looked like she hadn't eaten all day. I sat her down on the couch, took the letter from her trembling hands, and read it carefully. Standard language. Aggressive, but empty. A scare tactic. I looked up at her, met her eyes. "This is garbage. He's got no case. But we'll have to file a response, fast." She nodded, biting her lip, her eyes glossy with tears. I don't understand how they can do this. How can they try to take my son?" "Because money makes people cruel," I said quietly. "And you're sitting on a fortune, Emily, even if you don't want it." She looked at me then in a way she never had before. Vulnerable. Trusting. And it hit me like a wave, I was all she had. I touched her hand. Lightly. Just enough. "You're not alone," I said. "You have me." And in that moment, I meant it. At least, part of me did. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. I filed the counterclaim, sent a warning to the cousin's lawyers, and pulled a few favors with a judge I used to play racquetball with. The petition was dropped within 10 days. Emily was so relieved, she hugged me in the courthouse hallway, tight, like she couldn't let go. People watched. I didn't care. I took her to lunch that day. Nothing fancy. A small Italian place downtown. She laughed at one of my jokes for the first time. A real laugh. That sound stayed with me longer than I expected. I asked her how she was holding up. She said, honestly, "I'm tired. I'm scared. But when I'm with you, I don't feel those things as much." She reached for my hand across the table. That night, I couldn't sleep. It was happening. I was becoming part of her world. Not just her lawyer, not just her support. Something else. Something more. And yet, deep down, I knew I was still thinking about the inheritance. The properties. The control. I had memorized every line of that clause by now. I knew the trust regulations. I knew the payout timeline. I even knew that if Emily remarried and her new husband became Leo's legal guardian, he could technically gain temporary managerial rights over the estate. In other words, if I married her, I would control everything. Until Leo turned 18, I would be the steward of a financial empire. I told myself it wasn't about that anymore. That I cared. That maybe I had changed. But then I'd look at the numbers again, and the fantasy would return. One night, I was over at her house helping her sort through Jonathan's files, business deeds, company shares, board meeting notes. Leo was asleep again, curled up with a stuffed giraffe on the couch. The TV was still playing, casting blue shadows across the room. Emily handed me a folder and sighed. He never told me how complicated his life was. I didn't even know he owned half of these buildings. He trusted you, I said. That's why he didn't burden you with it. She gave a small, sad smile. I wish he'd trusted me enough to put me in the will. There it was. That unspoken weight between us. He probably thought he was protecting Leo, I said gently. Not cutting you out. She looked away. Sometimes I wonder if he didn't trust me at all. Her voice cracked on the last word. I stood and crossed the room. I touched her shoulder, and she leaned into me before I even said anything. I wrapped my arms around her. I didn't think about the money in that moment. Or the trust. Or the clause. I thought about her heartbeat against my chest. I thought about how long it had been since I held someone without thinking of what I'd gain. That scared me more than anything. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But something shifted that night. The next morning, she made me coffee in one of Jonathan's old mugs. It's weird, she said. You're the only person who makes this house feel less haunted. I didn't answer. I just looked at her and wondered what she'd say if she ever found out the truth. That I hadn't come to save her, I'd come to steal the throne. But the longer I stayed, the harder it was to tell where the act ended and where I began. I started turning down other clients. I let my firm believe I was taking time for personal matters. I spent more days at her house than my own. I took Leo to the zoo one weekend when Emily needed a break. The kid liked me. Called me Drew. It was all going perfectly. Too perfectly. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Emily got a call from a board member of one of Jonathan's companies. They wanted to schedule a vote on new leadership, something about restructuring now that Jonathan was gone. Emily asked me to attend. You know the business side better than I do, she said. They trust you. You've been incredible. I agreed, of course. Sat through the meeting, listened to the shark circle. They didn't say it outright, but I could tell they were looking for weaknesses. Gaps in control. Opportunities to grab power. And then one of them, a smug alderman named Whitaker, looked at me over his glasses and said, "So, are you just her legal counsel, or is there something more permanent being considered?" The room went quiet. I glanced at Emily. Her cheeks were flushed. I smiled coolly. Right now, I'm just here to protect Leo's future. But I care deeply for both of them. Whitaker leaned back, nodded, and said, "Good. Because the board needs stability. And the child's interest depends heavily on who's holding the reins." It was subtle. But it was clear. They'd accept me. If I made the move. If I made it official. Marry Emily. Become guardian. Take control. The door was wide open. And all I had to do was step through. But suddenly, that decision didn't feel as easy as it once did. Because Emily had started to look at me like I was her future. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what I wanted more. The power. Or the woman. I wish I could say I didn't know what I was doing. That everything just unfolded naturally, that it was all some slow-motion accident driven by grief and closeness. But that would be a lie. I knew exactly what I was doing. I saw the opportunity, I walked toward it, and somewhere along the way, I started believing I deserved it. It was a Wednesday morning when Emily made breakfast for all three of us. Eggs, toast, fruit for Leo. She poured me coffee without asking how I liked it, because by now, she already knew. It wasn't romantic, exactly. It was domestic. And somehow that made it feel more dangerous. Leo sat beside me, swinging his legs from the kitchen stool, a milk mustache painted across his face. He giggled when I tapped his nose and said, "Milk monster alert." Emily smiled from the stove. It felt like a family. God help me, it felt like home. After breakfast, I helped Emily organize the last of Jonathan's documents for the financial trustee. We'd been pushing the board to recognize Leo's rights through Emily as his guardian, and the paperwork needed to be perfect. I leaned over her laptop, shoulder brushing hers. That's when she turned to me. "Drew," she said softly, "do you ever think about what comes next?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she hesitated, "once all this legal stuff is over. When we're not thinking about courts and lawyers and wills every day. Do you think there's still something left for us?" Her voice cracked slightly on the word us. And there it was, the moment. The one I had rehearsed 100 times in my head. I could tell her yes, we could be together. I could tell her I loved her. I could propose. I could take everything. But something inside me clenched. Because as I looked at her, vulnerable and hopeful, I realized, I didn't just want the inheritance anymore. I wanted her to choose me not because I was a safe harbor, not because I was the man who fixed the legal chaos, but because she truly loved me. Because she saw me. And I wasn't sure she did. Not really. Still, I reached for her hand. "Emily," I said carefully, "I think about it all the time." She smiled then, and it was like watching the sun rise. Later that week, I went back to the office for the first time in nearly a month. My assistant, Megan, raised an eyebrow when I walked in. "Thought you'd quit and elope to Bermuda," she joked. I smiled tightly. "Almost," I muttered. My desk was buried in untouched case files. None of them mattered. I was in deep now. Too deep to care about anything else. But I did find something that stopped me cold. A letter. A formal notification from the estate's secondary executor, someone I hadn't even noticed before. A woman named Christine Farrow. Apparently, Jonathan had named her as a backup in the event of trustee conflict. And she was requesting a meeting. I scanned the letter twice. Christine Farrow. Why hadn't that name come up before? I called the number listed. She answered on the second ring. "This is Christine." "Ms. Farrow, this is Andrew Keller. I'm handling the Harding estate on behalf of Emily and Leo." A pause. "Then, I know who you are, Mr. Keller. I've been watching everything you've been doing." Her tone was cold. Measured. "Watching." I repeated slowly. "I've been quiet until now, but I think it's time we talked. In person. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. My office." She hung up before I could respond. The next morning, I drove across the city to a small but modern law office with her name engraved on a brushed steel plaque. She greeted me in the lobby, early 50s, sharp eyes, no smile. She led me to her office without small talk. "I knew Jonathan for nearly a decade," she said, settling into her chair. "He was complicated. But not stupid. He didn't write that clause about Leo by accident. He didn't leave Emily out by oversight." I sat across from her, palms slightly damp. "If you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, Mr. Keller," she said coolly. "I'm stating a fact. Jonathan and I discussed the clause at length before he signed the final will. He was adamant. Everything to Leo. Nothing to Emily. No exceptions." I forced myself to stay calm. "That's his right. But Emily's his son's guardian, so she still needs court approval to manage any major asset. She can't sell anything. Can't move funds. And if she marries someone with financial interests tied to the estate, the court could freeze control entirely pending a conflict of interest hearing." I blinked. She leaned forward, eyes sharp as razors. Which means if you marry her, Mr. Keller, the court might consider your involvement a legal risk. And that could bring everything to a halt. My mouth was dry. Why are you telling me this? Because I've seen men like you, she said. You start with good intentions. You tell yourself you're helping. But you're not helping her if you're building something on a lie. I left the office shaken. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to write her off as paranoid, territorial, jealous even. But deep down, I knew she was right. I had started this with a lie. With a plan. And now, every time Emily looked at me with those trusting eyes, every time Leo called out my name with excitement, I felt it. The weight of what I hadn't told them. The trap I had built with my own hands. That night, Emily and I had dinner again, just the two of us. She lit candles. She wore a soft navy dress I hadn't seen before. There was music playing, quiet, like a whisper in the background. Halfway through dinner, she said, I don't want to rush anything. But if you ever thought about staying, for real, I'd say yes. I stared at her. My fork frozen halfway to my mouth. She waited. And I realized I had never been this afraid of getting exactly what I wanted. Later, as I walked out onto the porch for air, Leo followed me, rubbing his eyes. He leaned against my leg, tired, trusting. You gonna live with us forever now? He asked. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know anymore. The next morning, I sat at my desk and pulled up the will. I reread the clause again and again. Leo inherits everything. Until he turns 18, assets are managed by a court-appointed trustee, with oversight. No legal guardian has sole authority. No loopholes. No shortcuts. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Emily's number. My thumb hovered. I knew I could go all the way. I could propose. She'd say yes. The court would review us, maybe approve temporary control. I could be at the center of it all, money, power, the illusion of a perfect life. Or I could tell her the truth. Tell her why I came into her life. Tell her what I saw in her file that first day. Tell her what I had planned. But how do you confess something like that to someone who sees you as her last safe place? How do you say, I meant to take advantage of you, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love? How do you say, I crossed lines I never meant to cross, and now I can't find my way back? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch with a blanket that smelled like her laundry detergent, listening to the silence of her house. A silence broken only by Leo's soft, rhythmic breathing from the room down the hall, and the quiet creak of the floor when Emily walked to the kitchen for water around 2 a.m. She didn't notice me awake. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Because if I spoke, I knew I'd have to say the truth. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready to hear it. By morning, I was staring at the ceiling, still wide awake, when the smell of coffee drifted into the living room. I sat up, ran my hands down my face, and walked to the kitchen. Emily was barefoot, still in pajamas, cradling a mug in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. You didn't come to bed, she said quietly. I didn't want to wake you. She didn't look convinced. But she nodded. Leo asked if we could go to the park today. He wants to show you how high he can climb on the monkey bars. I smiled faintly. I'd like that. We didn't talk about the night before. Or the things she'd said over dinner. We didn't talk about the unspoken weight in the air. But I knew it was coming. The moment I couldn't avoid. And it came faster than I thought. Later that afternoon, while Leo ran ahead to the swings, Emily and I walked the perimeter of the playground path. She held her sweater tight against the wind, even though it wasn't cold. I could tell she was nervous. Then she said it. Drew. I know you didn't come into our lives expecting this. Me. Leo. Any of it. I turned toward her slowly. She kept her gaze on the path. I know I've leaned on you more than I should. I know it's complicated, and fast, and maybe crazy. But when you're here, it's the first time since Jonathan died that I don't feel completely lost. I swallowed hard. Emily. She finally looked at me. So before this goes any further, I need to know, was any of this ever about the money? My heart stopped. There it was. Right in front of me. A direct question I didn't think she'd ever ask. And I could lie. I could give her the answer she wanted. She might even believe me. But something in me cracked wide open. I took a shaky breath. Emily, when I first met you, yes. It was. She blinked, frozen in place. I forced myself to keep going. That day in my office, when I opened the will. I saw the clause. I saw everything. And I knew that legally, nothing was really yours, not unless Leo became of age or you married someone the court approved. Her face went pale, her lips pressed tightly together. I stepped closer. I told myself I was just doing my job, helping you through a mess. But the more time I spent with you, the more I started thinking about possibilities. About what it would mean if I became part of your life. Leo's life. I let myself imagine a future where I got it all. She stepped back like I'd slapped her. I don't even know who you are, she whispered. I'm not proud of it, I said quickly. That's why I'm telling you now. Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the inheritance. I didn't plan on loving you. But I do. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Do you know what it feels like, she said quietly, to have everyone treat you like a stepping stone? I lost my husband. I watched Leo cry himself to sleep for months. And you were the one person I thought I could finally trust. I never meant to hurt you, I said, my voice cracking. She nodded slowly, bitterly. Yeah. That's what they always say. She turned and walked away. I didn't follow her. The next few days were a blur. She didn't answer my calls or texts. The firm called me back in to review another client's case, but I couldn't focus. I sat in meetings I didn't hear, answered questions I didn't remember. I went home to silence. Cold walls. Empty rooms. And I realized just how much of my life I had stitched into hers. Late one evening, I stopped by her house. Just sat in my car across the street, engine off, lights dimmed. I saw the light on in Leo's room, his little shadow dancing on the walls. I wondered if he missed me. I wondered if he hated me now. Then I saw another car pull into the driveway. A man got out. Older. Broad shoulders. Confident. He knocked on her door and waited. Emily opened it. She was wearing jeans and a sweater. Her hair pulled up. No makeup. She looked tired. Fragile. She smiled, faintly, and stepped aside to let him in. My stomach twisted. I didn't know who he was. A friend. A lawyer. Someone from Jonathan's side of the family. Or was she already moving on? I drove away before I could find out. 2 days later, I got an email from Christine Farrow. Short. 1 line. You should know, the board is considering an emergency motion to freeze the estate. I didn't reply. I knew it was coming. They had doubts now. About Emily. About her judgment. About me. I had dragged her into something that could hurt her worse than anything she'd already endured. And for what? Greed. Loneliness. Some fantasy about rebuilding my life through hers. The damage was done. And the worst part? I still loved her. A week passed before I heard from her again. It was a voicemail. Short. Quiet. I need you to come over. Not for me. For Leo. That was all. When I arrived, the house was dim. Emily looked like she hadn't slept. She led me into the living room without a word. Leo was curled on the couch, his favorite blanket pulled up to his chin. His cheeks were flushed. His eyes dull. He's been sick since yesterday, she said softly. High fever. I've taken him to urgent care, but he just keeps asking for you. My throat tightened. I sat beside him. He turned toward me weakly. Drew, he mumbled. Can you stay? I nodded. I'm not going anywhere, buddy. He smiled faintly and drifted back to sleep. Emily sat across the room, arms wrapped around herself. I told the board I want to appoint an independent trustee, she said. I'm stepping away from everything. I can't keep fighting. I looked at her in disbelief. Emily. I'm tired, Drew, she whispered. Tired of being used. Tired of people thinking I'm just some clueless widow. I just want to raise my son in peace. I stood. Walked to her. Then let me help you fix this. She shook her head. I don't think I believe in you anymore. I felt that like a punch to the chest. But I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just said, then let me believe in you, for once. She didn't answer. We sat there in silence, both of us holding pieces of something broken, something we weren't sure could ever be made whole again. I stayed that night. Not because Emily asked me to, but because Leo needed me, and deep down, I think she couldn't bear to be alone either. He drifted in and out of restless sleep, burning with fever, murmuring things I could barely make out. I sat on the edge of his bed, damp cloth in hand, wiping sweat from his brow and whispering the same lullabies I remembered from when my niece was little. Emily paced the hallway, phone in hand, speaking to a pediatric nurse. Her voice was cracked with worry. At one point, she looked at me through the doorway. Her eyes locked on mine. Not with love. Not with hate. Just fatigue. And something like the ghost of trust, lingering but not yet gone. When morning came, Leo's fever broke. He curled closer to me on the bed and whispered, "You didn't leave." "No, buddy," I said softly. "I won't leave." Emily watched from the doorway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was unreadable. Later that day, after Leo had finally fallen into a deeper sleep, I stood in her kitchen, pouring coffee. She stood beside me, silent. The tension was different now. Not sharp. Just hollow. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything sooner," I said finally. I tried to convince myself I wasn't that kind of man. But I was. At least, at first. She nodded slowly, without looking at me. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. Why I didn't see it. Why I let you in. I hated how calm she sounded. Calm like someone who's stopped hoping. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. I did. I manipulated a situation that should have been sacred. I saw you and Leo as a path to something that didn't belong to me. And now. I'd give it all up if I could go back and meet you without any of this between us. She finally turned to face me. "But we can't go back." "No," I admitted, "but maybe we can go forward." She looked down at her coffee mug. "I've been thinking," I said, cautiously, "about how we could still secure Leo's future without tying you to anything you don't want. There's a legal loophole. Jonathan's companies were structured in such a way that a family trust can be split into voting and non-voting shares. If we restructure it, Leo retains full financial benefit, but a third party, someone you trust, can manage oversight until he's of age." She raised an eyebrow. "You're still thinking like a lawyer." I shrugged. "It's the only way I know how to fix things." Her eyes softened just a little. "And who would that third party be?" "I'm meeting with Jonathan's former CFO this week. She's clean. Respected. She knew him better than I ever could. And she doesn't care about the money." Emily studied me carefully. "I'm not doing this to earn points," I said. "I'm doing it because it's right. Because I owe it to you." To him. There was a long pause. And then she whispered, "Thank you." That night, I went home to my apartment for the first time in almost a week. It was cold. Sterile. My bed felt unfamiliar. My fridge was empty. I realized how much I'd let myself believe that Emily's home, her kitchen, her son, her voice in the next room, had become my own version of peace. But I had no right to it anymore. The next morning, I met with Christine Farrow, Jonathan's CFO, in a modest office on the west side. She was tough, straight-backed, blunt to a fault. She listened to my proposal in silence, reading through the documents I'd drafted until she finally set them down. "I knew Jonathan for 18 years, she said. He'd hate everything about this situation. I know. But," she continued, "he'd also care more about Leo than anything. So. I'll do it. On one condition. What? You stay out of it. No behind-the-scenes favors. No hidden control. If I smell even one trace of manipulation, I walk. I nodded. Fair. She gave me a long, searching look. I don't know what your endgame is, Andrew, she said. But if this is genuine, then maybe you're not beyond saving. 3 days later, Emily signed the paperwork. Quietly. Without ceremony. I sat beside her in the conference room as she flipped through the documents, her fingers trembling slightly. She signed each page, and when it was done, she closed the folder and stood. That's it, she asked. I nodded. That's it. I thought it would feel like more. I wanted to tell her that I understood. That I too expected some grand, emotional release. But all I felt was tired. Leo's future is safe now, I said. Whatever happens between us, that's something we did right. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, Drew. For doing the right thing. I stood up too. And in that moment, I saw something in her eyes. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe, the start of it. I didn't see her for 2 weeks after that. We exchanged a few texts, brief, logistical. She thanked me when Leo's trust transfer went through, and I sent her a birthday card for him when he turned 5. But there was distance. I respected it. I spent the time pouring myself into pro bono work. Maybe I was trying to feel like I still deserved something good. I helped an immigrant mother fight for custody of her children. I spent hours in housing court, representing families on the verge of eviction. Every case reminded me of Emily, of what it meant to fight for someone else's stability when yours was already gone. Then one night, I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Emily standing there. No warning. No pretext. I know it's late, she said, but, can I come in? My heart jumped. Of course. She stepped inside slowly, as if the air felt different here. I wanted to see for myself, she said, who you are when you're not around us. When you're not trying to impress anyone. I stood still, unsure of what to say. She looked around, then turned back to me. Christine told me you cut yourself out of the new trust. Completely. Even though you didn't have to. It was never mine to begin with, I said. She nodded. And then, softly, she asked, did you ever really love me? Even if it started out the way it did. I stepped forward, slowly. I did. And I do. And I probably will for a long time. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since everything came crashing down, she let herself lean into me. Not fully. Not blindly. But willingly. I can't promise you anything, she said. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone like that again. You don't have to, I whispered. I'll earn every inch of it. That night, we talked until the sun came up. About Jonathan. About Leo. About grief, and choices, and mistakes we can't undo. But we also talked about what we still had. A heartbeat. A second chance, maybe not at a fairy tale, but at something real. And in that quiet morning light, I held her hand like it was the first honest thing I'd ever done. I thought the worst had passed. That by stepping back from the trust, by telling Emily the truth, and by showing up for Leo in ways that actually mattered, I'd redeemed myself. That maybe, just maybe, life would let me keep this fragile second chance. But life doesn't hand out grace that easily. It tests you first. It was a Thursday morning. The kind that felt quiet in a way that made you suspicious. Emily had dropped Leo off at daycare. I was in her kitchen making eggs, still surprised that she'd asked me to stay for the week. That small gesture, a toothbrush in her bathroom, my blazer on the chair, felt monumental. Like rebuilding trust brick by careful brick. She came back from the daycare unusually silent, a manila envelope clutched in her hand. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed with worry. I turned off the stove immediately. What happened? I asked. She didn't answer right away. She just handed me the envelope and sat down at the table. Inside were 3 sheets of legal stationery paper, each stamped with the name of Jonathan's estate lawyer. I recognized the watermark immediately. I read the letter once, then again, and then sat down across from her like someone had punched me in the stomach. It was a codicil, an amendment to Jonathan's original will. Undated. Unnotarized. But very real. In it, Jonathan stated that if anything were to happen to him under suspicious circumstances, the inheritance, including Leo's trust, would freeze for a period of 5 years, pending a court investigation. During that time, oversight would revert to the closest legal adult relative with blood ties to Leo. That relative wasn't Emily. It was Jonathan's younger brother, Matthew. The one we hadn't heard from since the funeral. "You didn't know about this?" she asked quietly, her voice a whisper of panic. I shook my head. "I swear, I didn't." "It was in the safe in the storage unit," she said. "I went there this morning to look for Leo's birth certificate. And I found this." I stared at the paper again, disbelief fighting with fear. It wasn't standard. It wasn't legally binding unless the court accepted it as a valid testamentary intent. But it could still cause real damage. Especially with someone like Matthew. He wasn't a good man. I'd met him once. He'd smelled like stale vodka and entitlement. Jonathan barely tolerated him. The guy had no job, lived off settlements, and believed the world owed him something just because he carried the family name. "What if he finds out?" Emily said. "What if he comes for Leo's trust? I don't think he even knows about this document. But if he does..." I paused. "Then we'll fight," I said. "Legally. I'll file a preemptive motion, get ahead of this. You don't need to worry." She leaned forward, trembling. "I am worried. Drew, what if this was always part of Jonathan's plan? What if he thought I couldn't protect Leo?" "You've been protecting him every single day," I said firmly. "You're his mother. No piece of paper changes that." She looked at me like she wanted to believe me, but the fear was sinking deep. I felt it too. Because I knew Matthew. And if he caught wind of that document, he'd see it not as a duty, but a payday. I didn't waste time. That afternoon, I drove into the city and filed a motion to suppress the codicil preemptively. I argued that it lacked formal witness signatures, notarization, and any supporting documents, which was true. I also requested that the court recognize Emily's maternal custody as sole guardian unless otherwise challenged in good faith. I knew it wouldn't stop Matthew if he really wanted in, but it would slow him down. When I came home, Emily was on the couch with Leo curled up beside her, watching cartoons like nothing had changed. She looked up at me, and I gave her a tired nod. "For now," I said, "we're safe." But the next day, the call came. From a number I didn't recognize. When I picked up, a slow drawling voice oozed through the line. Well. If it ain't the lawyer boy who thinks he owns my nephew." I closed my eyes. "Matthew." "That's right. You know, I heard a funny little whisper in my ear this morning. Something about a codicil. Something about a whole lot of money." I stayed silent. "I'd hate to get courts involved," he continued. "It's so messy. All those hearings, all that press. Might not be good for the kid. What do you want?" "Oh, nothing much," he said casually. "Just a conversation. Face to face. You bring the lady. I'll bring my lawyer. Neutral ground." I should have hung up. Should have told Emily not to worry. But the look in Leo's eyes that night, as he played with his toy trains, the same look Jonathan probably once had as a kid, made me realize I couldn't let someone like Matthew near him. We met at a public library conference room 2 days later. Matthew looked exactly as I remembered, slouched posture, cheap sunglasses indoors, an air of smugness that made my skin crawl. He brought a man with him, not a lawyer, just some friend who looked like he'd been paid in beer. Emily sat beside me, silent but strong. I admired her bravery. Her calm. Even when Matthew leaned forward and smiled that snake grin. "You always did love to play knight in shining, lawyer," he said to me. "But this ain't a fairy tale, is it? This is business. Family business." Leo's name came up too many times in that room. Every time Matthew said it, it felt like a transaction, not a person. "I want in," he said simply. 10% stake. In the trust. Quiet. Off the record. You get to keep your family fantasy, and I get what I deserve. You deserve nothing, I said. He laughed. You think the court's gonna say that when they see Jonathan's own words? Emily's hand tightened on mine. He stood up. You got 3 days, he said. Then I take it public. That night, Emily cried. Not loud. Not messy. Just quiet tears, standing in the doorway of Leo's room while he slept. I should have seen this coming, she whispered. I should have fought harder after Jonathan died. I didn't know there were still wolves waiting. I wrapped my arms around her and rested my chin on her shoulder. You're not alone this time. She turned toward me, her face streaked with tears. You really want to do this? Go through court again? Risk everything? I want to protect what matters, I said. And me, she asked, a soft whisper. Do I matter? You're everything, I said without hesitation. You always were. Even when I was too blind to see it. She leaned into me again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt her trust. Tentative. Shaken. But real. The next morning, I made a choice. No more half measures. I was going to war. Not just as her lawyer. But as the man who loved her. And as the only father figure Leo had left. I never liked courtrooms. People think lawyers feel at home there, but I never did. Not in that suffocating quiet where every word is dissected, every glance analyzed. And certainly not when the future of the woman I loved, and the child I was beginning to think of as my own, hung in the balance. We were in Judge Haywood's courtroom. Cold marble, tall windows, one tired clock ticking far too loudly. I sat beside Emily, dressed in charcoal gray, her hands trembling only slightly. Across the aisle was Matthew, smirking, in a cheap suit and borrowed confidence. He had filed an emergency motion to assert his claim as Leo's closest legal male relative and requested immediate control of the trust, citing the intent outlined in the codicil. That document, unnotarized, undated, and deeply questionable, was now Exhibit A. I had already filed our response, the codicil's lack of legal standing, Jonathan's history of conflict with Matthew, evidence of Matthew's financial instability, and, the most powerful angle, Leo's well-being. Still, this wasn't about paper anymore. It was about people. And people were unpredictable. Emily looked at me just before the judge walked in. What if they believe him, she whispered. Then I appeal, I said. Then I fight harder. But I don't stop. Ever. She nodded and looked straight ahead as Judge Haywood entered, stern and slow. The opening statements passed in a blur. Matthew's lawyer, a cocky young man trying to look seasoned, made vague appeals to blood rights and, honoring the deceased's intent. He portrayed Emily as emotionally unstable and me as manipulative. I didn't flinch. When it was my turn, I stood, breathing deeply before I spoke. Your Honor, this is not about money. It's not about legal nuances. It's about a child. A child whose father trusted his mother to raise him, love him, and protect him. And a document, which bears no legal weight, cannot erase that trust. I watched the judge's face as I spoke. He didn't blink. Didn't move. But he listened. When Emily was called to the stand, she was composed. Her voice shook a little at first, but then she found strength, not from me, not from fear, but from something deep within. I was Jonathan's wife, she said. I took care of him when he was sick, I held his hand when he died. I've raised Leo every single day since. Not because of a will. Because I'm his mother. Did your husband ever discuss this codicil with you? The lawyer asked. No. Never. Do you believe he wrote it? She paused, and her voice softened. I think maybe he did. He was scared. He never trusted Matthew. But maybe he didn't trust me enough either. I don't blame him for that. We were both grieving. But I know he wouldn't want this. Not now. Not like this. Matthew scoffed from the other side, loud enough that the judge warned him to quiet down. When I took the stand, the other side tried to break me. Did you enter into a relationship with Mrs. Dawson for financial gain? The lawyer asked bluntly. No, I said, my jaw tightening. You never thought of marrying her as a path to the inheritance. I hesitated, and that hesitation was real. Yes, I finally admitted. I did think about it. In the beginning. I'm not proud of that. But I never acted on it. And I told her the truth. I came clean. Because I care more about being honest than being rich. The lawyer smirked. And now you expect the court to believe you've had a complete change of heart? I don't expect anything, I said. I'm not asking for the money. I'm not even asking to be in Leo's life unless Emily wants me there. But I am asking you not to give that boy to a man like Matthew. I saw Judge Haywood's eyes narrow slightly. That mattered. The turning point came when the judge asked to see evidence of Matthew's financial situation. We'd requested his records, but he'd refused. So the judge ordered a break and gave Matthew an ultimatum: produce documents, or the court would make a decision without them. He didn't return after recess. His lawyer stayed, red-faced and muttering. He admitted Matthew had departed the courthouse and couldn't be reached. Emily exhaled, long and hard. The judge didn't even look surprised. 30 minutes later, he gave his ruling. The codicil presented, Judge Haywood said slowly, while possibly authentic, does not meet the standards of a binding legal document. Furthermore, the court finds compelling evidence that Mr. Matthew Dawson poses a financial and emotional risk to the minor child in question. He looked at Emily. Guardianship, both physical and legal, shall remain with Mrs. Emily Dawson. Oversight of the trust will continue under her until Leo reaches the age of majority. Then he looked at me. And Mr. Drew Harrison, the court acknowledges your prior involvement and regrets that personal interest clouded your role. However, your transparency, legal actions to protect the child, and support of the mother weigh heavily in your favor. He paused. This hearing is closed. The gavel struck. And I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. We didn't speak until we were outside. The sun was out, warm and blinding. Emily stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment, as if taking it all in. She turned to me. So, what now? I was hoping you'd tell me, I said gently. She smiled, just slightly. I need time. But I want you around. For Leo. And maybe, for me. I'll wait, I said. Good, she replied. Because I think you're the only person I've ever met who fought for me without trying to own me. That night, we had dinner at home. Just the three of us. Leo ran around the living room in his pajamas, pretending to be a dragon. Emily laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like months. And as I watched them, something shifted in me. It wasn't about what I'd tried to take anymore. It was about what I'd almost lost. And what I still had the chance to build, honestly, imperfectly, and fully. Not a conquest. Not a clause. But a family.